Hands off my counter. Trash like you doesn't belong in my bank!
His lip curled in disgust. The woman didn't move. She just looked at him, calm, almost sad.
I only came to withdraw my money, sir.
Your money? Black thief. That cash is stolen, and we both know it!
It's my account. I can show you.
Shut up!
His jaw clenched, eyes burning with contempt. She didn't shout back. She met his eyes, steady.
Sir, you're going to regret treating me like this.
That was the
Sir,
spark.
you're going to
His
regret
face
treating
went
me like
red.
this.
Then his hand flew. The slap cracked across the marble lobby. Her head turned, but she didn't flinch. Gasps. Phones rose one by one. In 90 seconds, that slap would cost him everything. He just didn't know it yet. Let's rewind. 6 hours before that slap, the morning was ordinary. The sun came up soft over a mid-sized Ohio city. Traffic hummed. Coffee shops filled with the smell of fresh espresso and warm bread. It was a Wednesday, the kind of day no one expects to remember. A plain gray sedan pulled into a parking spot downtown. Nothing fancy. No driver, no tinted windows. Just a clean, quiet car you'd pass without a second glance. The woman behind the wheel sat still for a moment. She held a travel mug in both hands, the steam curling up past her face. She wore a soft cardigan over a simple blouse. No jewelry that shouted. No designer logos. She looked like anyone's neighbor. Her phone buzzed on the seat. A text from her daughter lit up the screen. "Good luck today, Mom. Don't let them stress you out." She smiled, typed back a quick heart, then set the phone to silent. Whatever today held, she'd handle it the way she handled everything. Calm, steady, on her own terms. Her name was Camille Reeves, but the people inside that building had no idea who she was. And that, strangely, was exactly the point. She stepped out of the car. The morning air was cool against her skin. Somewhere down the block, a bus sighed to a stop. Pigeons scattered off the sidewalk as her flat shoes tapped toward the glass doors of Meridian National Bank. It was the flagship branch, the big one. Tall windows, polished floors, a heavy brass handle that felt cold in her palm. Inside, the lobby was quiet, mid-morning slow. A velvet rope guided a short line. 2 tellers worked behind the counter, and along the back wall sat a glass-walled office with a man inside it. That man was watching. His name was Gerald Wilson, the branch manager. He sat straight in his chair, adjusting a gold nameplate that already sat perfectly straight. He liked things in order. He liked being the one who decided what order meant. Through the glass, his eyes followed Camille as she walked in. She felt it, that half-second too long. The look that asked a silent question. What is she doing here? She'd felt that look 1,000 times. In stores, in lobbies, in rooms where people assumed she'd wandered in by mistake. She didn't react. She just joined the line and waited her turn. A greeter near the door gave her a thin, careful smile. "ATMs are right over there, ma'am," he offered, before she said a single word. "Thank you," Camille replied gently. "I'm here for the counter." The greeter blinked, surprised, and stepped back. Here's the thing you should know about Camille. She wasn't here on a whim. A wire transfer for a property deal had failed that morning. A technical glitch, nothing more. She needed an in-person withdrawal authorized before a 2 o'clock deadline. Simple, routine, the kind of errand thousands of people run every single day. She glanced at her watch. Plenty of time. She wasn't worried. The line moved slowly. A man in a suit finished his business and left. An older woman counted her cash twice before walking off. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the air smelled of paper, carpet cleaner, and old money. Camille watched the room with quiet patience. She noticed the small things. The way the tellers tensed when Gerald passed behind them. The way he corrected one girl's posture with a single tap on her shoulder. The way everyone in that building seemed to shrink a little whenever he walked by. This was his kingdom, and he ruled it like a man who'd forgotten that the people around him were people. Camille didn't know yet how the morning would end. She didn't know about the slap, the gasps, the phones. She only knew she had a withdrawal to make and a deadline to beat. She stepped forward as the line shrank. One person ahead of her now. The teller smiled. The The clock ticked toward her turn. And in his glass office, Gerald Wilson set down his pen, stood up, and buttoned his jacket. Something about the woman in the cardigan had caught his attention. He started walking toward the counter. The calm before the storm was about to break. Camille reached the counter just as her turn came. The teller, a young woman with a name tag that read Megan Taylor, gave her a warm, genuine smile. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" "Good morning," Camille said. "I'd like to make a withdrawal from my account. A cashier's check would be fine, too." She slid her ID in a folder of documents across the counter. Megan picked them up and started typing. Everything was normal, routine, the kind of transaction that happens 100 times a day. Then Megan's eyes flicked to the screen. She paused. The amount was large. $2.6 million, pulled against a verified corporate account. For a personal request, that's a number that makes anyone double-check. But the account was real. The funds were there. The paperwork was clean. Megan's training told her to verify and proceed. But her instinct, the one shaped by months of working under Gerald Wilson, told her to glance toward his office first. That glance was all he needed. Gerald crossed the lobby in 7 quick steps. He slid himself between Camille and the counter, his shoulder turning to block her, as if she were a problem to be contained. "I'll handle this one, Megan," he said without looking at the teller. Megan opened her mouth, then closed it. She stepped back, eyes dropping to the keyboard. Gerald looked at Camille for the first time, up close. His eyes moved over her cardigan, her plain blouse, her quiet face. And in half a second, he decided who she was. $2.6 million, he said, loud enough for the line behind her to hear. "That's quite a number for someone like you." "It's my account," Camille said calmly. "The documents are right there." "Documents can be faked." He didn't even pick them up. "This account doesn't match your profile. You understand how that looks." The lobby went quiet. The man behind Camille shifted on his feet. A woman 2 spots back leaned in, curious. Camille felt the heat of their eyes. She'd been here before. She kept her voice level. "My profile," she repeated. "What exactly about my profile concerns you, sir?" Gerald smiled, thin and cold. "Let's not play games. How did you come into this kind of money? Be honest with me." There it was, the accusation, dressed up as a question. Loud enough for everyone to hear, soft enough to deny later. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere behind the counter, a printer hummed and fell silent. Camille could smell his coffee breath, sharp and bitter, as he leaned closer. "I came into it the same way anyone does," she said. "I earned it. Now, I'd like to complete my withdrawal." Gerald let out a short laugh. He turned to the security guard near the door and gave a small nod. The guard, a broad man named Dale Moore, drifted closer, thumbs hooked in his belt. His shoes squeaked against the polished floor, slow and deliberate, a sound meant to be heard. "Here's what's going to happen," Gerald said. "I'm going to hold your ID while we verify a few things. You can wait right there." He picked up her driver's license, held it to the light like it was counterfeit, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "You can't keep my ID," Camille said. "I can do whatever protects this bank." He turned his back on her. And then he did something that made the whole lobby understand exactly what was happening. He looked past Camille to the man waiting behind her, a man in a business suit who had just walked up. "Sir, I can help you over here," Gerald said warmly. "Come on up." The man hesitated, glanced at Camille, then stepped forward. Gerald served him with a smile, processing his deposit in under 2 minutes, chatting about the weather, the local football team, anything. Camille stood there, holding her folder, watching a man who arrived after her get helped before her. The message was unmistakable. She didn't exist. She was an inconvenience to be stepped around. Her jaw tightened, just slightly. Under the folder, her thumb pressed hard against the cardboard edge, the only sign of what she was holding in. But she said nothing. Not yet. The businessman finished and left, throwing one last uncomfortable look over his shoulder. From behind the counter, Megan finally found her voice. "Mr. Wilson, I can verify the account right now. It only takes a second. The funds are clearly—" "Did I ask you, Megan?" Gerald snapped, not even turning around. Megan flinched. Her hands froze over the keyboard. She wanted to help. Anyone could see it in her face. But she was young. She needed this job, and she'd watched what happened to people who crossed Gerald Wilson. She lowered her eyes and went silent, and that silence cost her something she'd carry for weeks. Camille saw all of it. The fear, the shame, the small surrender of a good person in a bad situation. She gave Megan the faintest nod, as if to say, "It's all right. I understand." Gerald turned back to Camille, as if remembering she was still there. "Still here?" he said. "I'd like my ID back," Camille said. "And I'd like to speak with whoever is above you." That was the wrong thing to say. Or maybe the right thing, depending on how you look at it. Because the idea that someone like her might have a complaint, might have standing, might have power over him, struck Gerald as almost funny. "Above me?" he chuckled. "Lady, in this building there is no above me. I am the one you answer to." He had no idea how wrong he was. Camille studied him for a long moment. Not with anger, with something closer to recognition. She had met 100 Gerald Wilsons in her life. Men who mistook a title for character. Men who felt biggest when they were making someone else feel small. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. "Excuse me?" "Your name. I'd like to know who I'm dealing with." Gerald straightened, almost proud. "Gerald Wilson, branch manager. And you are a woman who's about to be escorted out if she keeps wasting my time." A few people in line shifted, uncomfortable. One older customer frowned and looked away. A young man near the back quietly pulled out his phone, sensing that something was wrong, that this had crossed a line from rude into something uglier. Camille glanced at the small camera mounted in the ceiling corner, its red light blinking steadily. She noted it. She noted everything. The time on the wall clock, the teller's frightened eyes, the guard's hand resting near his belt. "Mr. Wilson," she said, "I'm going to ask you one more time, politely. Return my identification and process my withdrawal. That's all I came here to do." "And I'm telling you," Gerald said, leaning in, dropping his voice so only she could hear, "people like you don't come into a bank like this and walk out with millions. Not on my watch. So you can sit down, shut your mouth, and wait, or I can have Dale walk you out the door. Your choice." He straightened back up, put on a pleasant face for the room, and gestured toward a row of waiting chairs against the wall. "Have a seat, ma'am," he said loudly, performing kindness now. "We'll get to you when we get to you." Camille didn't sit. She stood exactly where she was, calm and unmoved, her folder held against her chest. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past the tall windows, and a slice of sunlight swept across the marble floor and vanished. The lobby watched. The cameras watched. And something in the air had shifted, though Gerald was far too pleased with himself to feel it. He checked his watch, sighed for the benefit of the room, and muttered something about people who didn't know their place. Then he walked back toward his glass office, chin high, already certain he'd won. But here's what he never stopped to ask himself. Why was this woman so calm? Why hadn't she cried or shouted or run? Most people in her place would have folded by now. She hadn't moved an inch. A smarter man might have felt a chill at that. Gerald felt nothing but his own importance. He had just spent 10 minutes humiliating a woman he decided was nobody. He had no idea he'd just made the worst mistake of his entire career. And the morning was only getting started. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Camille stood near the counter, her folder against her chest, her ID still in Gerald's pocket. The line had thinned. A few customers left rather than watch. Others stayed, sensing that something was unfolding, the way people slow down near an accident. Gerald returned from his office with a new idea, and a new way to twist the knife. "Before we go any further," he announced, loud enough for the room, "bank policy requires me to inspect any bag connected to a flagged transaction. Standard procedure, nothing personal." It was not standard procedure. There was no such policy. He had invented it on the walk from his office, and he knew it. But who in that lobby would correct him? He was the man with the nameplate. "You don't have the right to search my bag," Camille said evenly. "I have every right to protect this institution." He snapped his fingers toward the guard. "Dale, the bag." Dale Moore hesitated. For just a second, something flickered across his face. Doubt, maybe, or the dim awareness that this had gone somewhere bad. But the paycheck won. It usually does. He stepped forward and reached for the tote bag on Camille's shoulder. She didn't fight him. She simply let the strap slide off and watched as he set it on the counter and opened it under the fluorescent lights. What spilled out was not evidence of any crime. It was a life. A pack of receipts held with a rubber band. A paperback novel with a cracked spine. A small bottle of prescription pills. A folded sheet of construction paper. A child's drawing with "I love you, Mom," written in crooked crayon letters across the top. Dale picked through it slowly, his ears going red. A woman in line made a small, sharp sound of disgust, not at Camille, but at the scene itself. At a grown man rifling through a stranger's private things in the middle of a bank, with a child's drawing lying face up on the marble for everyone to see. Camille's eyes settled on that drawing. Her daughter had made it last spring, taped it to the fridge, then made her promise to keep one in her bag for hard days. And for the first time all morning, something moved behind her calm, a flash of real pain, quickly mastered. She reached out and gently lifted the drawing off the cold marble, folding it back along its worn crease, tucking it close to her chest. It was a small motion, but the whole lobby watched her do it, and a few people looked away, ashamed to be part of this. "Are you satisfied?" she asked quietly. Gerald peered into the bag, made a show of it, then waved a hand. "Pack it up. Doesn't prove anything. People who launder money don't carry it in their purse." He let the accusation hang there, ugly and casual. Then he leaned in for the next blow. "I'll be honest with you," he said, lowering his voice into something that was almost gentle, which made it worse. "I've already called the police. Fraud. Suspicious activity. They're on their way. Now, if you want to walk out that door before they get here, I won't stop you. No one would blame you for leaving." It was a trap, and a clever one. If she ran, she looked guilty. If she stayed, she faced officers primed by his version of events. He was betting she'd panic. He was betting she was exactly who he'd decided she was. He leaned in one more inch, so close she could feel his breath on her ear, and dropped his voice to a whisper that no camera could catch. "I've done this 100 times," he murmured. "People like you always run, and when you do, everyone in here will know I was right about you." Then he pulled back, smiled wide for the room, and clasped his hands like a man who had just offered her a glass of water. Camille's heart was pounding. Anyone's would be. But she had learned long ago that the body's fear and the mind's clarity could live side by side. She breathed in slowly, counted to 3, and let her hands stay loose at her sides. She would not give him what he wanted. The crackle of a real radio came from the entrance. 2 officers stepped through the glass doors, hands resting on their belts, scanning the room. Gerald straightened, suddenly the helpful manager, ready to perform his story for an audience with badges. Camille felt the walls tighten. She knew how this could go. She had read the same news everyone else had. A black woman, an accusation, 2 officers, a man in a suit who owned the narrative. She knew exactly how easily a morning like this could turn into a tragedy. So she did the only thing that had ever protected her. She stayed calm, and she spoke the truth, clearly, for the record. "Officers," she said, her voice carrying across the lobby. "My name is Camille Reeves. This is my account. I have my documents here. This man has confiscated my identification and refused to return it. I would like that noted." One of the officers slowed. He looked at the folder in her hands. He looked at the spilled bag on the counter. He looked at the child's drawing. Something in the picture didn't match the story he'd been told on the way over. "Sir," the officer said to Gerald, "did you take this woman's ID?" Gerald's smile twitched. "For verification. She was being difficult." "Hand it back to her, please." That single instruction, the first time all morning anyone had told Gerald no, cracked something open in him. The crowd was watching. The officers weren't on his side. The script was slipping out of his hands, and he could feel it. Camille watched him unravel, and she said one more thing, quietly, just for him. "You should be very careful, Mr. Wilson," she said, "because the way this ends is entirely up to you." It wasn't a threat. It was almost a warning. a door held open for him to walk back through. But Gerald didn't hear mercy. He heard a woman, this woman, telling him what to do in his own bank, in front of customers, in front of the police, in front of everyone who had ever respected the nameplate on his desk. His face went red, then a deep, blotchy purple. The veins stood out on his neck. Years of believing he was untouchable, of deciding who mattered and who didn't, all of it boiled up at once and burst. "You don't get to talk to me like that," he hissed. "Not you. Not here." And then, in front of the officers, in front of the crowd, in front of the small red light of the ceiling camera blinking steadily in the corner, Gerald Wilson raised his hand and slapped her across the face. The sound cracked through the marble lobby like a gunshot. For one full second, nobody moved. Megan's hand flew to her mouth. A woman gasped. The two officers froze, then surged forward. And a dozen phones, which had been recording quietly all along, captured it from a dozen angles at once. The slap, the follow-through, the stunned, ugly look on Gerald's face as he realized, half a heartbeat too late, what he had just done. Camille's head turned with the blow. A red mark bloomed across her cheek. Her eyes watered, not from weakness, but from the sheer force of it. But she did not fall. She did not scream. She straightened slowly, lifted her chin, and turned her face back to him. And she looked at him with something he had never expected to see. Not fear, not anger. Pity. The kind of pity you feel for someone who has just stepped off a cliff and doesn't know it yet, who is still standing in the air, certain the ground is beneath him. "Sir," one officer barked, stepping between them. "Back away, now!" Gerald stumbled backward, his hands still hanging in the air, the heat draining from his face. The crowd's silence had turned into a low, angry murmur. Someone said, "I got the whole thing." Someone else said, "He hit her. He actually hit her." The radios crackled. A chair scraped back somewhere. The morning had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, and every person in that lobby knew it. And in the middle of it all stood Camille Reeves, one hand resting lightly on the counter, the red mark glowing on her cheek, calm as still water. She had warned him. She had given him every chance. Now the only thing left was to find out who she really was. And outside, at that very moment, 3 cars were pulling up to the curb. The glass doors swung open hard enough to bang against the stops. 3 people walked in fast, heels and dress shoes clicking across the marble in a tight, urgent rhythm. At the front was a woman in a sharp navy suit, an ID badge swinging from her neck, her face pale and set. Behind her came 2 men carrying leather folios, the kind of men whose calm is its own kind of warning. The woman in navy was Catherine Anderson, Regional Vice President of Meridian National Bank. She had come for a scheduled walkthrough of the flagship branch, part of a quiet transition that almost no one on the floor knew about yet. Her eyes swept the lobby, the officers, the spilled bag, the red mark on the customer's cheek, and then the customer's face. Catherine stopped cold. The color drained from her own face in an instant. She did not look at Gerald. She did not look at the police. She crossed the entire lobby in long, fast strides and stopped in front of Camille. And then she did something that made every person in that room go silent. She lowered her head. "Ms. Reeves," Catherine said, her voice shaking, "I am so sorry. We were expecting you upstairs. I had no idea you'd come to the floor yourself. Please, are you hurt?" The word hung in the air. Reeves. Said with respect. Said with fear. Gerald's mind refused it. He actually laughed, a short, ugly bark of disbelief. "Catherine, you don't understand. This woman is a fraud suspect. I caught her trying to—" "Be quiet." Catherine didn't even turn to look at him. Her eyes stayed on Camille, but her voice cut through the lobby like a blade. "Do not say another word. You don't talk to me like—" Catherine turned then, and the look on her face stopped him mid-sentence. "Gerald," she said slowly, each word landing like a stone. "This woman is the chair of Vantage Sterling Holdings. As of Monday, Vantage Sterling completed its acquisition of this bank's parent company. She owns Meridian National. She owns this building. She owns the chair you sit in and the desk with your name on it." The lobby gasped as one. "She is the reason you still have a paycheck," Catherine went on, her voice rising now. "And you just put your hands on her face in front of 40 witnesses and 2 police officers." Time seemed to stop. Gerald's mouth opened. No sound came out. The blood that had flushed his face all morning drained away in a single rush, leaving him gray, almost white. His knees bent without his permission, and he caught himself on the edge of the counter, his fingers scrabbling against the cold stone. "No," he whispered. No, that's not possible. There's been a mistake. She can't be." He looked at Camille. He looked at her cardigan, her plain blouse, the quiet face he had decided meant nobody. And he saw, for the first time, what had been standing in front of him all along. She came in dressed like—" His voice cracked. I couldn't have known. I was just following procedure. I was protecting the bank. That's all I was doing, that's all." And then Gerald Wilson, branch manager, the man who ruled his little kingdom, broke completely. His legs gave out and he sank against the counter, sliding halfway to the floor. His shoulders shook. A horrible, choking sound came out of him, half sob, half plea. The gold nameplate he had straightened that morning caught the light on his chest, suddenly meaningless, a costume on a man who had just lost everything. "Please," he wept, looking up at her now, tears streaking his red face. "Please, I have a family. I have a mortgage. I didn't know who you were. I swear to God I didn't know. Please don't. Please, I'm begging you." The crowd watched him crumble in total silence. Just minutes ago, he had performed power for this exact audience. Now they watched him beg on the floor of his own bank. Camille looked down at him for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, and it carried to every corner of the room. "That's the whole problem, Mr. Wilson," she said. "You keep saying you didn't know who I was, as if that's the point. As if it would have been fine to treat me this way if I really had been some ordinary woman trying to take out her own money." She paused. "I didn't come here today as the owner. I came here because complaints crossed my desk. Complaints about this branch. About how people who looked like me were treated at that counter. I wanted to see it with my own eyes." She looked around the silent lobby, then back down at him. And I saw it. Gerald had no words left. He just wept, his face in his hands, a small and shrinking thing on the marble floor. Camille straightened, touched the mark on her cheek once, and turned to Catherine. "Get the footage," she said. "All of it. And someone get me a chair for the teller. She's been standing through all of this, and she's the only one in here who tried to do the right thing." The power in the room had not just shifted, it had completely, permanently reversed. What happened next took less than 10 minutes, but for Gerald Wilson, those 10 minutes lasted a lifetime. He scrambled back to his feet, wiping his face, and the change in him was almost dizzying to watch. The contempt was gone. The swagger was gone. In their place was a desperate, sweating man who finally understood the size of his mistake. "Ms. Reeves, please." His hands were shaking. "I was following protocol. Large withdrawals get flagged. That's policy. You can ask anyone. I was just doing my job. I had no way of knowing who you were." Camille held up one hand, and he stopped talking. "You said that already," she said quietly. "And you still don't hear yourself. There was no protocol. You searched a woman's bag and dumped her child's drawing on the floor. You held her ID hostage. You served a man who came in after her, right in front of her. None of that is policy. That's just who you are when you think no one important is watching." Gerald's mouth opened and closed. He had no answer because there wasn't one. Catherine Anderson stepped forward, her voice flat and final. "Gerald, you're suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. Give me your keys and your badge." His hands trembled as he unclipped the badge from his belt. The gold nameplate, he reached for it on his chest, then stopped, as if he couldn't bring himself to hand it over. Catherine simply held out her palm and waited. He set it there. It looked smaller in her hand than it had on his desk. One of the corporate men was already at the counter, speaking in low tones with Megan. He pulled a slim laptop from his folio and began securing the footage, the ceiling camera, the ATM cameras, the timestamps. "We have the full sequence," he murmured. "Clean angles, audio on 2 of them." Around the lobby, customers were quietly stepping forward with their phones, offering their own recordings. A man in a gray coat, Albert Smith, held his phone up. "I got all of it, from the first word he said to her, whatever you need." "Thank you," Camille said. "We'll need it." Then came the part Gerald never saw coming. The 2 officers, the same 2 he had called to deal with the so-called fraud suspect, stepped toward him instead. One of them took out a notepad. "Sir, we received the call about suspected fraud," the officer said. "But what we witnessed when we arrived was a physical assault on this woman. That changes things." "What?" No, you don't understand. We're going to need you to come with us and make a statement. There are witnesses, and there's video. This is an assault complaint now." The color, what little had returned, drained from Gerald's face again. The room he had ruled for years tilted around him. They didn't drag him out. They didn't need to. They simply walked him toward the doors, 1 officer on each side, past the same velvet rope where he had performed his authority an hour ago, past the same customers he had ignored and talked down to. Every eye in the lobby followed him. He kept his head down. He couldn't look at any of them. The glass doors opened, the morning light poured in, and then they closed behind him, and the lobby let out a long, collective breath. For a moment, Camille just stood there. The adrenaline that had carried her through the morning began to ebb, and her hand drifted up to her cheek, which still stung. She let herself feel it, just for a second. Then she walked behind the counter, to where Megan sat in the chair someone had brought her. "You tried to verify my account," Camille said gently. "Twice. I saw it. You spoke up when it was hard to speak up." Megan's eyes filled. "I should have done more. I'm so sorry. I've watched him treat people like that for months, and I never—" Her voice broke. "I was scared of losing my job." "I know," Camille said. "Fear is real. But you didn't stay silent today. That matters more than you know. And we're going to talk, you and I. Soon." Megan nodded, wiping her eyes. Camille looked around the quiet lobby one last time. The drawing was back in her bag. The marble gleamed. The storm had passed. But she knew the truth. This wasn't over. Not even close. It was just the beginning of making it right. The video went up that same night. Albert Smith had posted his clip before he even left the parking lot. By morning, it had 4 million views. By the end of the week, it had crossed 60 million. You've probably seen a version of it yourself. The gray-haired manager, the calm woman, the slap that cracked across the marble, the gasps. But the video was only the beginning. Because once the world started watching, the truth underneath it all began to surface. Meridian National launched an internal review, and Camille made sure it had teeth. An outside investigation firm was brought in too, independent, with full access to records. And what they found turned a single ugly morning into something much larger. Gerald Wilson had a history. For years, he had quietly flagged, delayed, and extra-verified customers, and a pattern jumped off the page when investigators lined up the names. The accounts he questioned, the withdrawals he slowed, the people he sent away. Again and again, they shared one thing in common, and it had nothing to do with fraud. Worse, complaints had been filed, 11 of them, over 6 years. Customers who said they'd been humiliated, talked down to, treated like criminals. Every one of those complaints had been routed back to the branch manager, the very man they were about to file against. He had buried them in a drawer. They never went any higher. Megan Taylor became one of the most important voices in the investigation. She came forward with dates, with details, with a small notebook where she had quietly recorded the things she'd witnessed and been too afraid to report. She wasn't afraid anymore. "I kept hoping someone above him would notice," she told investigators. "I didn't know the person above him would walk in the front door." The story spread fast. A local journalist named Lauren Davis dug deeper than anyone, tracking down former customers, former employees, people who had carried their bad mornings in silence for years. Her report ran on the front page and then went national. The headline was simple: "A pattern not an accident. The comment sections filled with thousands of people sharing their own versions of the same story. Different banks, different cities. The same cold feeling of being watched, doubted, followed, and judged before saying a single word. The video had given all of them a voice. Then came the legal reckoning. The criminal case moved first. Gerald Wilson was charged with assault. His defense tried the only card it had, that he was a stressed manager who simply lost his temper in a tense moment. But the prosecution had something his lawyers couldn't argue away. The prosecutor was a sharp, methodical woman named Grace Johnson, and she didn't raise her voice once. She didn't have to. She let the evidence speak. She played the footage, all of it. Not just the slap, but the whole hour before it. The bag search, the confiscated ID, the man served out of turn, the whispered threats the cameras almost missed but didn't. And then she laid the bank's own records on the table, the 11 buried complaints, the pattern of flagged accounts. This was not one bad moment, Grace told the courtroom. This was a way of treating people, practiced over years, that finally happened in front of enough cameras that it could no longer be hidden. The defendant didn't lose control of who he was that day. He showed us exactly who he'd always been. Gerald sat at the defense table, gray and hollow, watching the bank he had served, the institution he thought he was protecting, testify against him through its own files. The thing he had trusted to back him up had become the thing that buried him. The jury didn't take long. Guilty. The sentence was heavier than anyone expected for a single slap, because by then the court understood it was never just about a slap. Gerald received a meaningful jail term, followed by probation. He was ordered to pay restitution, and in a separate ruling that cut even deeper for a man like him, he was permanently barred from working anywhere in the banking industry again. The title he had worshipped was taken from him forever. There was a civil settlement, too. The bank, facing its own negligence in burying those complaints, paid out to the customers who had been harmed over the years. Camille made sure that money actually reached the people who deserved it, not just the lawyers. But here's the part that mattered most to her, the part that turned punishment into something better. She didn't stop at one man. Using her authority over the entire institution, Camille rebuilt the way Meridian National handled complaints. She created an independent reporting line that bypassed branch managers entirely, so a customer's complaint could never again be buried by the very person they were complaining about. She ordered real bias accountability training, the kind with consequences, not the kind you click through and forget. And she set up regular audits to catch patterns like Gerald's, long before they exploded in a lobby. She made sure no future Camille, and no future customer of any kind, would have to prove they belonged before being treated like a human being. And then she did one more thing. She found Megan Taylor. The young teller who had been too scared to speak and then found her courage anyway, was promoted. Not as a thank you gift, but because Camille had watched her in the worst moment and seen exactly what kind of person she was under pressure. Megan was given a role helping lead the bank's new customer fairness program, training others to do the things she had once been too afraid to do. "You spoke up when it cost you something," Camille told her. "That's the only kind of courage that counts." Outside the courthouse, on the day of the sentencing, reporters crowded around Camille for a statement. She kept it short. "This was never about revenge," she said. "It was about a simple idea, that every person who walks into a bank or a store or any door in this country deserves to be treated like they belong there. Today, that idea won." She didn't smile for the cameras. She just nodded once and walked to her plain gray car and drove home to her daughter. The storm had broken, and out of it, something better had finally started to grow. A few weeks later, Camille Reeves walked back into that same branch. This time, nothing about the morning was tense. The fluorescent lights still buzzed softly overhead. The marble floor still gleamed, but the air felt different, lighter, the way a room feels after a window has finally been opened. She wore the same kind of plain cardigan she'd worn that first day. No suit, no entourage, just a woman walking into a bank. The greeter at the door smiled and said good morning, warmly, with no second look, no silent question, no glance toward the ATMs. A new manager nodded respectfully from across the floor. And behind the counter, Megan Taylor looked up, saw her, and broke into a wide, genuine grin. "Morning, Ms. Reeves," Megan said. "The usual counter?" "The usual counter," Camille said, smiling back. She stepped up, and this time, no one blocked her path. No one searched her bag. No one decided in half a second who she was allowed to be. She made her withdrawal in under 3 minutes, the way it should have gone the first time, the way it should go for everyone. As she turned to leave, she paused by the spot where it had all happened. The place where a man had once dumped her child's drawing onto the cold marble. She looked at it for a moment, then let it go, and walked out into the sunlight. That's where the story ends. But the reason it matters doesn't end there. Think about what almost happened in that lobby. A woman did everything right. She stayed calm. She told the truth. She showed her documents. And still, none of it was enough. Because one man had already decided she didn't belong before she said a single word. She had something most people don't. She owned the bank. That's what saved her that day. But ask yourself a harder question. What about the people who walk through that same door without a title, without a fortune, without a regional vice president rushing in to vouch for them? What happens to them? That's the part that should stay with you. Because the humiliation, the suspicion, the assumption of guilt before a word is spoken, those things don't only happen to CEOs in disguise. They happen to ordinary people, every single day, in real life, with no twist ending, and no one important walking through the door to set it right. The story you just watched is fiction. The feeling at the center of it is not. It's been documented in case after case, in lobbies and stores and traffic stops all over this country. So here's the real question. Not whether this happens, but what we do when we see it. Are you the person who films it? The person who speaks up, like Megan finally did, even when it costs you something? Or the person who looks away and tells yourself, it's not your business? Because here's the truth this whole story is built on. Power doesn't reveal who you are. It reveals who you've always been. The way a person treats someone they think can do nothing for them, someone they think is powerless, that's the real measure of them. Every single time. Gerald Wilson found that out the hard way. The question is, what the rest of us choose to do before life forces the lesson on us. So let's talk about it. Have you ever watched something like this unfold in real life? In a store, a bank, anywhere? Did you step in or did you stay quiet? There's no wrong answer and no judgment, but your story might be exactly the thing someone else needs to read today. Drop it in the comments below. Read what other people share. This is how the silence finally breaks, one honest story at a time. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something, do one small thing. Give it a like, so it reaches the next person who needs to see it. Share it with someone who would understand. And subscribe, because there are more stories like this one coming. Stories about ordinary people, real courage, and what justice actually looks like when it finally arrives. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Now go be the kind of person who doesn't look away.